This is the journey of American sports from 1910 to 1949. Throughout this 40-year span, there were many political, social, and economic aspects that influenced sports.
By the 1910s, industry had influenced sports. White-collar workers were seen as weak, and sports became a way to get their masculinity back. Sports also became a way for bosses to get their blue-collar workers to learn teamwork and to divert them from labor activism. The YMCA was an athletic organization that came about at this time for men to join sports teams to show their masculinity and use up their leisure time.
Then came World War I. By 1917, young, fit American men were being called to war. Due to this, sports teams lost many of their players, which impacted sports negatively.
The 1920s are considered the Roaring Twenties due to the prosperity that came with this decade. One part of the Roaring Twenties was the rise of mass media. Radios became an important part of everyday life, and they were used to publicize sporting events, which increased attendance of fans at games. Most sports became commercialized in the 1920s, including college sports. This led to bigger crowds at college games and the introduction of major collegiate sporting events.
The 1920s was the start of the golden era of baseball, and in 1930, Lou Gehrig and Babe Ruth battled for the most home runs in a season. Even during the Great Depression of the early 1930s, the golden era continued. With the Great Depression, unemployment rates rose and people had to search for jobs, which at times affected sports negatively since many were too preoccupied with looking for work and didn't have money to spare. However, sporting events kept their attendance up by becoming a way to raise money for the unemployed, which impacted society in a positive way. After the New Deal brought unemployment to many, attendance dropped because people didn't have time to go to games during the day. So, on May 24, 1935, the MLB introduced lights for night games.
The late 1930s was also the era of great boxing. One of the greatest matches in boxing history occurred on June 22, 1938, the night Joe Louis beat Max Schmeling. The battle between Americans and Germans continued when America entered World War II in 1941. Sports teams lost many of their athletes and much of their equipment to the war effort.
World War II brought about another battle. The fight against racism abroad sparked a fight against racism at home, what was pegged as the double victory. One example of Americans fighting the racism at home is Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier of Major League Baseball in 1947.